Montana Territory. August 1876. The wind kicked up dust along the main road of Red Elk Crossing as the sun sank low over the mountains, casting long shadows across the timber buildings. Wagon wheels creaked in the distance. A dog barked somewhere behind the post office, and the clatter of boots against the boardwalk filled the air like a drumbeat. Inside the Half Moon Saloon, the piano banged out a tune just slightly off-key. It was the kind of evening where trouble walked in through the front door without knocking. And that was the moment Rowena Nels showed up. She stepped onto the wooden stoop, the hem of her plain blue skirt dusty from travel, her dark red hair pinned up in a way that spoke more of necessity than vanity. She looked tired, like she had been on the road too long with nowhere to land. Some folks noticed her right away. Strangers always drew eyes in a place like Red Elk Crossing, especially women alone. A man leaned against the doorframe and let out a short, cruel laugh. "You lost, sweetheart. This ain't a place for church girls." Another voice followed, louder, sharper. "Maybe she's here to find herself a husband. That what you need, darling? Or just a warm bed for tonight?" Rowena stiffened. Her lips pressed together, and she didn't flinch, but her fingers curled tightly around the worn leather strap of her satchel. Her knuckles turned white. Inside the saloon, Wesley Whitlow had just set his whiskey down on the bar. He had been watching the door since he heard the laughter. He recognized mean talk when he heard it, and he recognized her, Rowena Nels. He hadn't seen her in 8 years. Not since they were both 20 and her family moved east after her mother died. Back then, she wore her hair in long braids and could ride better than most boys. They used to race horses down along the creek bed where the cottonwoods grew. He remembered the way she laughed when she beat him. He remembered other things too, the kind that stayed lodged in the chest like a splinter. Wesley stood up from his stool, the floorboards creaking under his boots. He walked through the crowd, past the card tables and the smoke and the noise, and stepped out onto the stoop just as one of the men reached for her arm. Wesley grabbed the man's wrist before it made contact. "She's my wife," he said, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. Time seemed to stall. "You so much as look at her again, you'll be chewing teeth for dinner." The man blinked. "Your wife?" he asked, half laughing. "That's right." Rowena turned to look at him, her eyes wide in surprise, but she didn't pull away. Wesley lowered his voice. "You all right?" She nodded once, just barely. He turned back to the gawkers. "Anyone got a problem with that?" Nobody spoke. The air shifted. The two men who had mocked her backed off, muttering under their breath. Wesley placed a gentle hand on the small of Rowena's back and guided her inside. The saloon dimmed behind them, smoke curling in the lamplight. Wesley led her to the corner table furthest from the bar, the one with the cracked leather booth seat. "You came back," he said once they sat. "I did not know you were here," she said quietly. "I only meant to pass through." Wesley studied her face. Her blouse was worn thin at the cuffs. There was a new hardness in her eyes, like something had been carved out of her. "You alone?" he asked. "I have 2 children," she said. "They are at the boarding house asleep, Ada and Amos. My brother was meant to meet us here, but he never came. I think he left us." Wesley's jaw tightened. "You think or you know?" "I know," she said. "He left a note, said he could not do it anymore, said he needed his own life." Wesley sat back, heart heavy. "You got no one else?" "No," she said. "I worked in a laundry in Helena until the owners sold it. We were headed to Idaho. I thought maybe my cousin could help, but I was wrong." He nodded slowly. "You hungry?" "I am," she admitted. "But the children ate the last of the biscuits this morning." "I was hoping I could find work for a night or two." Wesley stood. "Come with me." "I cannot leave them alone. I meant all of you," he said. "Come on." He led her out the back door of the saloon, past the kitchen, and down the narrow alley to where his horse was tied. He helped her into the saddle, then walked beside her up the road to the boarding house. She led him to the room where her children were curled up on a straw mattress under a thin blanket. Rowena knelt beside them and touched their hair gently. "I have a place," Wesley said quietly. "It is not big, but it is warm, and you will not be mocked under my roof." She looked up at him. "Why did you say that? At the saloon?" "Because I meant it," he said. "You do not even know me anymore." "I know enough." She searched his face for a long moment. "You are serious." "I have not said anything I do not mean." Rowena stood. "Then we will come." By the time they reached Wesley's small homestead at the edge of town, the moon had risen high. The cabin was made of pine logs and had a low roof, but it was clean and solid. He built it himself after the war with his own hands. He lit the lantern and set out bread, cheese, and dried apples. The children stirred, wide-eyed and sleepy, and Rowena fed them carefully, her voice soft and reassuring. Wesley watched the way she moved, the way she touched their shoulders tenderly. She had always been strong, but now she was something more: a mother, a survivor. Later, after the children were asleep in Wesley's bed and he had set up a cot for himself near the hearth, Rowena sat with him at the table. "You did not have to do this," she said. "I know," he replied. "You could have walked away, but I did not." She looked at him. "I do not know if I can ever repay you." "I do not want to be repaid," he said. "I just want you safe." Her lips trembled and she looked down at her hands. He reached across the table, slow and steady, and placed his palm over hers. "You and the children can stay as long as you need," he said. "No one will bother you here." She nodded, and when her eyes met his again, there was something new there, something quiet and warm. Wesley did not say another word. He just sat with her as the fire burned low and the night settled gently around them. By morning, the frost on the lower pasture had burned off, and a thin line of chimney smoke rose against a pale sky. Wesley stepped outside with a bucket, boots crunching over the packed dirt between the corral and the well. The quiet was familiar, comforting in the way only solitude earned by hard work could be, but it felt changed somehow. As if the land itself knew it was no longer just his. Inside, Rowena was coaxing the children out of warm quilts, helping Ada into a woolen pinafore and smoothing down Amos's unruly hair with damp fingers. She moved with the settled grace of someone used to managing small things in tight spaces. When Wesley came back in, her eyes met his, and for the first time there was no trace of hesitation in her gaze. "I'd like to do some mending today," she said. "If you've anything needing repair." He set the bucket down and wiped his hands on a cloth. "There's a basket under the bench by the window, mostly shirts. I never had the patience to fix the seams right. I'll see what I can do." Ada tugged at Rowena's sleeve. "Can I help? There's a needle for you if you keep your stitches straight." Wesley poured hot water from the kettle into a tin basin and handed it to her. "I'll be out with the horses. If you need anything, I'll come find you," she said, her voice even. He nodded and stepped back outside, the door thudding gently behind him. The corral fence needed tending where one of the rails had splintered. Wesley worked with a rhythm born of practice, his thoughts drifting as the hammer struck clean. He thought about the way Rowena had stood the night before, shoulders squared, her children behind her. She'd always had backbone, but now it was tempered, quieter. He admired that. A person could survive a hard trail by endurance alone, but to carry others through it, that was something else. He heard the crunch of boots on gravel and turned. Amos stood a few yards off, arms folded, watching with the wary stiffness of a boy unused to men. "You want to help?" Wesley asked. Amos shrugged. "Don't know how." "Well, you got eyes and hands. That's enough to start." Wesley handed him a smaller hammer. The boy hesitated, then stepped forward. Together they worked in silence, Wesley showing him how to brace the wood and drive the nails straight. After a time, Amos glanced up. "You a soldier?" "I was." "When?" "Before you were born." The boy didn't ask more, and Wesley didn't offer. Some things settled better left alone. Later that day, Rowena came out with a bundle of shirts folded neat. She handed them over without ceremony. "You've worn the elbows out of 3, she said. "I patched them, but they'll need replacing soon. I'll pick up cloth at the store next week." He looked down at the fine stitching. "You've a sure hand." She brushed hair from her face, the wind lifting a few wisps loose. "My mother taught me, before she took sick. Said a woman ought to know how to make a thing last." They stood quietly as the air warmed around them. Ada ran past chasing a grasshopper, her laughter bright against the hush of the hills. Rowena folded her arms, watching her daughter. "I thought we'd be somewhere else by now, someplace with kin, but the road always seemed to turn the wrong way." "You're here now," Wesley said. She nodded, but her mouth tightened. "I don't want charity." He leaned against the fence. "You think I see you like that? I don't know what you see." "I see someone who didn't break when things turned hard. I see a mother who crossed half of Montana with 2 kids and no guarantee. That's not weakness." She looked over at him, the set of her jaw easing. "And what do you want in return?" "I want what's fair. Someone to share the work. Someone who doesn't turn bitter when the wind comes out of the north." Rowena didn't speak for a long moment. "I can cook, mend, tend a garden. I don't complain when things go lean." Her voice was steady, almost clinical. "I know. But I won't marry out of gratitude. I'm not asking you to." She gave a short nod, then turned back toward the cabin, her skirt catching on the dry grass. That night, Wesley brought in a rabbit he'd snared and handed it to Rowena without a word. She skinned and cooked it with onions and dried sage, the scent filling the small room. The children ate without fuss, and afterward, Rowena wiped their hands clean and set them to drawing shapes in the hearth ash with a stick. Wesley sat across from her, elbows on his knees. "I've got a friend down near Fort Benton. He runs cattle, but he's short a cook and needs someone who can read orders. You offering to send me along? I'm offering to let you choose. You want to stay here, you have a place. You want something else, I'll help you get there." Rowena studied the firelight dancing along the floorboards. "I never asked for your protection." "No, but you have it." She looked at him then, something unreadable in her eyes. "You always speak so plain, only when it matters." She nodded slowly, then reached for her daughter's shawl where it hung behind the door. "I'll walk the girl out to look at the stars. Helps her sleep." Wesley opened the door for them. As they stepped out into the cool air, he watched the way Ada reached for her mother's hand, and how Rowena held it without looking down. The sky above them was wide and dark, pricked with early stars. He listened to their footsteps fade into the night. He didn't know what she'd decide. But for the first time in years, he hoped. The next morning broke with silver light slanting through the slatted shutters, cutting across the cabin floor in quiet bars. The wind had shifted in the night, carrying the scent of pine smoke and creek water. Wesley stood at the stove, stoking the coals, while Rowena filled a basin with water warmed from the kettle. Ada was still asleep, curled beneath the quilt, but Amos sat on a stool near the hearth, peeling the skin off a boiled potato with the care of someone who understood waste. As Rowena wrung out a cloth and wiped her hands, Wesley glanced at her over his shoulder. "I've got to ride out to the north fence. Lost a steer sometime yesterday near the hollow. Won't be back till near dark." She nodded, not asking for more. "I'll take the children down to the river bend. There's flat stones there." Ada says she wants to build a tiny house for a mouse. Wesley gave a low chuckle. "That bend's known to flood come spring, so tell her not to get too attached." "She won't, but it'll keep her quiet for a while." Wesley turned back to the stove, flipping the last of the corn cakes. "You mind if I leave the rifle with you, just in case?" "I'd rather have it," she said without hesitation. He set it leaning in the corner by the door. "Ain't seen trouble out this way in months, but I'd rather not trust luck." Rowena met his eyes. "Neither do I." By midday, Wesley was gone, the dust of his horse's hooves long settled. Rowena packed a small bundle of bread and dried plums, wrapping it in a cloth and tucking it into her apron. She tied Ada's bonnet under her chin, checked Amos's boots for loose soles, and led them down the narrow path through the cottonwoods. The river bend lay a half-mile east, where the trees opened to a low bank of sand and shale. The sun was high and bright, and the children ran ahead, laughing as they skipped over roots and chased dragonflies through the tall grass. Rowena kept pace slowly, her eyes always scanning the edges of the trees. She hadn't walked that far in months. Her legs ached before they reached the bend, but she said nothing. The river was low, curling lazily around the bend, its surface broken now and then by a rising fish. The children dropped to their knees near the water's edge, fingers digging through the cool stones. Rowena spread the cloth on a flat rock and sat, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders despite the warmth. From her seat, she could see the trail to town, a thin line of earth worn flat by wagons and boots. She watched it without meaning to, her thoughts drifting further than she liked. When the sound of hooves came, soft and slow, she tensed. A man on a dun mare emerged from the trees. His hat was pulled low, a rifle strapped to his saddle and a bedroll tied behind him. He wasn't from town, his coat was too fine, his boots too clean. He slowed when he saw her, raising one hand. "Afternoon, ma'am," he called. Rowena stood, one arm behind her reaching for the rifle. He saw it and stopped his horse. "I mean no trouble," he said. "Just passing through, looking for a family named Nels." Her blood ran cold. "Why, I work for a man called Benjamin Nels. He sent word to meet his sister here, said she'd be traveling with 2 children. Rowena kept her voice even. "He left us, told me to wait, then disappeared, left nothing but a note." The man frowned. "Didn't say that when he hired me. Promised wages if I helped you cross into Idaho." Rowena didn't lower her hand. "You're too late. I can take a message back. I've nothing left to say to him." The man nodded once, tugged his reins, and steered the mare back toward the trail. When the sound of his horse faded, Rowena let out a shaky breath. Ada was still stacking stones in a crooked line. Amos looked up at her, eyes sharp. "You think he was lying?" he asked. "No," she said, "but I think your uncle doesn't know what he wants. And I'm tired of waiting on men like that." Amos didn't reply, but he nodded, once like he understood something new. That evening, Wesley returned with his coat slung over his shoulder and sweat darkening the collar of his shirt. He paused when he saw the children asleep on the floor, cheeks flushed and hair tangled. Rowena sat at the table, sewing a torn hem by lamplight. Her hands didn't stop as he entered. "I ran into a man at the river bend," she said. "Rider out of town, hired by my brother. Said he was supposed to help us reach Idaho. Asked if I wanted to send word." Wesley hung his hat by the door. "You tell him anything." I told him I wasn't going. He stepped closer, the floor creaking beneath his boots. "That mean you're staying?" Her hands stilled. "I don't have anywhere else to be." "That's not what I asked." She set the hem down on the table and looked up. "I'm tired of waiting for someone to save me, and I'm not passing through anymore." His voice was quiet. "I'm not asking you to owe me anything." "I know." Her eyes held his. "But I'd rather build something here than chase after people who keep leaving." He nodded. "Then we'll start with the roof. It leaks near the stovepipe come the rains. Could use a second pair of hands." "I can patch it by morning," she said. They didn't say more. She picked the needle back up and he sat across from her, the space between them filled with soft lamplight and the hum of night insects outside the window. The silence was easy now, not born of caution but of something settled. Neither of them reached for more than that. Not yet. But the air between them had changed again, like the sky before a long-awaited rain. 3 days after the rider passed through, Rowena stood on a ladder, balanced near the cabin's roofline, a strip of canvas between her teeth and a hammer in her hand. The morning sun had already warmed the western slope, and the pitch she used to seal the patch glistened dark in the light. Below, Amos crouched by the woodpile, sorting out dry kindling from damp, and Ada sat cross-legged with a rag doll, stitching a crude dress from scrap muslin. Wesley returned from the South Ridge at mid-morning, leading a bay mare with a crooked gait. He tied her loosely to the post and stepped over to the ladder. "You've been up there since dawn?" he asked, shading his eyes. Rowena tucked the last nail into place and looked down. "Just about. The rain'll come before month's end. Better patch it now than sleep in puddles." He steadied the ladder as she came down. "You ever think about raising chickens?" She brushed flecks of pitch from her sleeve. "If you've got hens, I'll see to them. I don't, but I've got lumber enough for a coop. Thought maybe we could trade for pullets at the Johnson place. Their oldest boy owes me for a wagon axle." Rowena nodded once. "Then let's build it." He watched her hands blistered at the base of the fingers, dark under the nails, and said nothing more. She moved past him to gather the children and set them to winding fresh twine around kindling bundles. By late afternoon, they'd measured out the corners of the coop beside the smokehouse, and Wesley had driven the first posts while Rowena held each one square. Ada sat nearby with a basket of nails, handing them up one by one and humming under her breath. When the shadows stretched long and the sawdust clung to their sleeves, they paused to drink from the canteen. "You could have left that first night," Wesley said. Rowena didn't look at him. "I kept waiting to feel like I should. And now, I don't think about leaving anymore." He shifted his weight. "You ever miss the city?" "I miss quiet in a different shape, but not the people, not the staring." Wesley ran a finger along the edge of the plank they just nailed. "There's a dance in town next week. Harvest gathering. I don't go, but folks bring in food, sell their jams, trade things." She raised her eyes. "You think someone needs apple preserves? I think Ada might like to see other children. And I reckon you might want to speak to someone who isn't me." Rowena gave a soft exhale, almost a laugh. "If I go, I'd need a proper dress. These sleeves wouldn't pass in a churchyard, let alone a dance." "We've got time," he said. "I've got a bolt of calico put away. Wasn't sure what for." "Now I might." She didn't answer right away. The wind stirred the edge of her apron and a crow called once from the tree line. "You always plan ahead?" she asked. "Only when it matters." She turned to him then, eyes steady. "I'll sew it if you'll come with me." His voice was low. "All right." That night, after supper, Rowena stood at the work table with the calico unrolled before her. The lamplight pooled over the faded blue pattern, soft as dusk. She measured twice before cutting, her hands sure, her brow relaxed. Wesley sat nearby, whittling a piece of pine into a spoon for Ada. "You ever dance?" he asked. "Once, at the Grange Hall in Missouri. My father let me go with the neighbor's son. He spilled cider down the front of his vest and nearly stepped on every toe I owned." Wesley chuckled. "Sounds like a fair showing." "I was 16, she said. "I thought it was heaven." The scissors paused in her hand. She looked down at the fabric a long moment. "Sometimes I forget I was ever young," she said, "like it happened to someone else." "You were," Wesley said. "And you still are." She didn't speak, but her shoulders eased. He stood, setting the spoon aside, and moved to the door. "I'll check the barn before bed." She met his eyes as he passed. "Thank you." "For what?" for letting me be useful. For not looking at me like a burden. He reached for his coat. You're not. Not to me. When he stepped out into the night, the air was cool against his face, and the stars overhead were clear and bright. Behind him, the cabin glowed golden through the window, and inside she was still cutting the fabric, her head bent in concentration. He watched the light a moment longer before turning toward the barn, a quiet steadiness settling in his chest like something long unspoken had finally begun to take root. The harvest gathering arrived on a Saturday softened by cloud cover. The sky, a pale shell gray that held the scent of turned earth and drying hay. Red Elk Crossing stirred early. Wagons arriving from outlying farms, women in bonnets balancing baskets, and men in suspenders tightening the ropes on covered stalls. Someone had strung up bunting between the porch posts of the Grange Hall, and the sound of a fiddle being tuned carried down the main road like a bird call. Rowena stood at the basin, rinsing Ada's face with a damp cloth while the girl fidgeted under her touch. "Don't pull," Ada whispered, glancing at Amos, who was trying to button his vest without looking like he cared. "I'm not pulling," Rowena said gently. "I'm smoothing. There's a difference." She'd finished the dress 2 nights earlier. The calico had softened with washing, and the high collar folded just so, her stitches holding firm along the cuffs. She hadn't worn anything new in years. As she fastened the last button, she caught her reflection in the windowpane, shoulders straighter, eyes clearer. Wesley waited outside in his Sunday shirt, sleeves rolled and collar open. He'd shaved that morning, and though he didn't mention it, Rowena noticed. He held the reins of the wagon with one hand and a wrapped bundle in the other. "Brought something," he said as she stepped down from the porch. He unwrapped it slowly, revealing a second-hand ribbon, deep green and satin smooth. "Found it at the mercantile. Thought it might suit." Rowena took it without speaking. She tied it around her braid slowly, fingers steady even as something warm rose behind her ribs. The children rode in the back with a blanket spread beneath them and a jar of pickled carrots between their feet. As they rolled into town, Rowena watched the faces gathered along the road, neighbors she didn't know, farmhands, shopkeepers, children darting between booths. No one stared. A few nodded. One woman offered a small wave. Rowena returned it. They set their jars and pies on a shared table, and Wesley helped Amos hang a tin lantern from a post near the edge of the dance square. Ada ran off with a girl her size, their laughter trailing behind like ribbon tails. The sun slipped behind the clouds and the fiddle finally found its rhythm. Wesley offered his hand. "I haven't danced since before," he said simply. Rowena looked at him. "You sure?" "I am." She stepped into his arms, her hand settling in his without hesitation. The music was slow, the kind meant for steady feet and quiet smiles. They moved together without show or flourish, but with the kind of ease that came from shared labor, shared silence, and the soft weight of understanding. "I used to think starting over meant leaving everything behind," she said as they turned. "It doesn't," Wesley said. "It just means deciding what you'll carry forward." She looked up at him. "And what are you carrying?" He didn't answer at first. "Then, you." Her breath caught not from surprise but from the finality of it, how simply he said it, as if it had been true for some time now. "I've never been anyone's choice," she said. "You're mine," he said. "And I don't want a half-life, not anymore." The music faded. She didn't let go. "I'd marry you," she said softly. "Not out of need or gratitude, but because you make this place feel like more than survival." "I want to build it with you," he said. "A life that's ours. No debts between us. Just days strung one after the other." She nodded. "Then let's start." They danced once more before night came fully, and the lanterns lit up the square in golden rings. The children fell asleep on a quilt near the wagon, Amos curled protectively beside Ada, their breathing quiet and even beneath the stars. Wesley lifted them gently, one by one, and Rowena rode beside him, her hand resting on his thigh, not for balance, but for the comfort of touch. When they reached the cabin, he carried the children inside while she stoked the fire. The kettle hissed low and steady, and the old floorboards groaned under familiar feet. She hung her dress carefully behind the door, then stepped to where he stood by the window. "There's no need to wait," she said. "Not if we're agreed." His hand rose to cup her cheek. "I've waited longer for less." She leaned into him, lips brushing his with a quiet certainty that settled deep. There was no rush between them, no urgency, just the sure, slow unfolding of something long held at bay. They lay down that night in the same bed, the children safe in the next room, the fire casting soft light across the walls they'd repaired together. The wind moved gently through the trees outside, and inside, everything held. They married 2 weeks later beneath the cottonwoods by the river bend. Wesley wore his cleanest shirt, and Rowena carried a handful of dried wildflowers tied with the green ribbon he'd given her. Ada held her mother's hand and grinned wide, and Amos stood beside Wesley with his chin high, proud and unflinching. The preacher from town spoke few words. He didn't need many. After the vows, they shared a meal outside the cabin, neighbors and townsfolk bringing food and chairs, laughter rising into the late afternoon. No one asked for explanations. No one needed them. That evening, Rowena sat on the porch with her children asleep nearby and Wesley's arm draped around her shoulders. The stars blinked awake above the pines. "You ever wonder what would have happened if we hadn't met again?" she asked. "I'd still be here," he said. "But I wouldn't be whole." She rested her head against him. "We've both come a long way," he kissed her hair, "and we're not going back." They stayed like that until the moon climbed high, the world quiet around them, their hearts settled in the only place they needed to be home.